Well, 1 Samuel chapter 31. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines, the arch enemy of Israel, normally down in the western, southern part of the country, have now been conquering during the time of Saul, and now they're over in the middle of Israel. And if you understand what's taken place here, is they actually are splitting the country in two. So you'd have Israelis to the east, and then Israelis to the north and the west. And they seem to be an unstoppable force. They seem to be growing in their magnitude. And Saul now had to make his camp on Mount Gilboa, which is over in the Jezreel Valley, often known better as the Valley of Armageddon. It's the most fertile soil on planet Earth to this day. And this Mount Gilboa, you'd recognize it if you look at pictures of Israel, because it looks like a pimple. It's the most bizarre looking mountain there, and just sort of pops up. It's from ancient volcanic eruptions, but it's a unique mountain. And so the Philistines are pressing. Israel runs back all the way to its starting point, back to its camp, trying to hold out. They're getting pushed. And the Philistines now, as Israel's on the run, they followed hard after Saul and his sons. And the Philistines killed Jonathan, Abinadab, Malchishua, Saul's sons. What a great sorrow when we hear such things, especially when we hear of Jonathan. Remember what a mighty man of God he was. At one time, when they were fighting the Philistines and Saul was trying to come up with the plan, and the children of Israel were getting afraid as the Philistine army was growing, they started shrinking until they were down to just a few hundred men. And Jonathan, secretly in his heart, like the faith of his good friend David, said, God is the one winning the battle. And he could do that with nobody. He could do that with one person. He could do that with the whole army. And he says this word of faith to his armor bearer. And his armor bearer said, let's go. And Jonathan starts going by himself without anybody else knowing towards the line of battle. But as he starts to get close, they got to climb up this cliff. And basically, they just put it before the Lord. God, if we get there and we're able to do this, then we'll know it's of you. But if we get there and they notice us and they say, hey, let us come down to you, then we'll know it's not. We're going to get out of here. And they got up to the top of the hill and they said, come on up here. And they knew that was the Lord. And Jonathan by himself conquered the Philistine army. A tremendous man of faith. He knew the heart of God. He knew and said it more than once. David, you are going to be the king, and I'm going to be your number one fan. I'm going to be your number one supporter. He knew they were linked with this incredible friendship. And now, along with his dad, along with the children of Israel, he is dead. And the battle became fierce against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was severely or mortally wounded by the archers. So their focus is to kill the king and his top soldiers as they're fleeing away. Let's get past all the army that's there in front of them and get a group just powering through to the very back line where Saul would be protected. And as they began to shoot arrows in the distance, they got Saul, and he knew from being a warrior, this is not the kind of wound that you recover from. And Saul said to his armor bearer, draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell on it. So Saul knew, these guys will keep me alive and torture me. Remember what they did to Samson, right? They plucked out his eyes and kept him alive and made him like an animal at the grain year after year to just use him as a circus act, sort of, to just mock the God of Israel by mocking. And this is what they would have done. They would have tortured Saul, tried to keep him alive, tore him around to city and let people do all kinds of abusive things. He knew how torturous and evil these people were. And he's like, I'm going to die, but not until after these guys inflict me with torture. And his armor bearer would not. Maybe in his heart he had heard David say more than once, you don't touch the Lord's anointed. So he falls on his sword to die. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him. Sort of a very disturbing event. Don't know really what to make of that. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor bearer and all his men died together the same day. So a horrendous loss to Israel, all in one motion. And when the men of Israel, in verse 7, were on the other side of the valley, those who were on the other side of the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead. They forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. So the people realized what's happening as the country's getting split, and they realize that they've got to get out, why the chances to be able to get out and to reassemble with their people in other locations. And so they lose their houses, that which God had given them as their portion all the way back to the time of Moses and Joshua. And in verse 8, it happened the next day when the Philistines came and stripped the slain. They found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head, stripped off his armor, sent word throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim it in the temple of their idols and among the people. So at this time, this was a trophy. You might remember David cut off the head of Goliath, put it on a stick, and toured around with it. And in this case, they're taking the head of Saul and they're touring around with it to show everybody that the great king is a nobody. And to do desecration to the dead body at this time was a major insult, because typically a body would be greatly honored and wrapped, and there would be a great procession and a service to honor them in all their years, especially as a king. But they didn't want to give Israel that chance. They didn't want Saul to be honored. They wanted him to be dishonored. And so they're doing the most vile thing they can think of to his dead body and his sons. And they put his armor in the temple of their Asherah, saying basically the true God is a God of the Asherahs who conquered that. What's that God's name over there in Israel? Whatever his name is, he's a nobody. Our gods are the great gods. Their gods are nothing. And they fastened his body to the wall of Bet-Shan. Now, most of the cities in the Bible have been found. This particular one, at the foot of what was a pretty big hill, and the city was on the top of this hill, Bet-Shan. They actually, years later, the Romans built a vast, modernized city at the bottom of this hill called Bet-Shan. And in the early ADs, an earthquake hit and just completely decimated it. But now what they've done is they've gone in and they've unearthed it, and they're rebuilding this Roman city. They're just standing up all these giant pillars and putting together the bathhouses and so forth. And each time I go to Israel, it's amazing how much more they have done. I remember, decades ago going there when they had really just found it and there was really hardly anything there. Now it's almost like walking through a Roman city 2,000 years ago. But as you walk through the city and come to the end, there's a staircase they've built, a wooden staircase, rather scary, very, very steep, going way up to the top of this hill. And there is the site of this ancient Philistine city, no doubt a place of worship to their gods. And they hung Saul's body there to just sort of show, as far as the eye could see, look at what has happened. We have conquered the king of Israel, and it's to their shame that this has happened. Now in verse 11, when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and traveled all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of the sons from the wall of Bethshan. And they came to Jabesh and burned them there. Then they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree of Jabesh and fasted 7 days. Now you say, why did the children of Jabesh Gilead go to such a heroic step to get Saul? This was very treacherous. They had just fought in a battle. They're no doubt completely exhausted. They get back to fortify their cities in case the Philistines come to attack them. And then they get news about Saul and his body. And they turn around and travel all night long. It's always amazing to me to think whatever moonlight they had, they're out there with their spears and their bows and sort of at a little jog, going, and then sneaking through the enemy lines and coming up and cutting down the body of Saul, and then carrying that body, which was a huge body, he was a big man, and carrying him and his sons away. Well, 20 years earlier, Saul was anointed as king. And most of the nation didn't respect Saul because he was just a cattleman, for sheep and goats and so forth. And after Samuel anointed him, they didn't respect him. And he just went back to his farm, just went back to work. And some time went by. And the word comes that this guy Nash, an Ammonite kingdom next to Israel, had come over to Jabesh Gilead and said, we're going to completely, utterly destroy everything, violate everybody, and you better surrender. And they said, okay, we're up for that. What's it mean if we surrender? Do we pay you tribute? And they said, yes, you're going to pay some heavy taxes, but we are also going to require the right eye of everyone. And they said, well, we have no one to defend us. And they said, give us a couple of days here. And they went to Saul, and Saul called Israel together and said, hey, we've got to go help our brother. And people weren't too excited about it because these are the people that settled on the wrong side of the Jordan. They're the ones who didn't come into the promised land. And he didn't have really a good group of people that joined with him at all. Most of them were still like, yeah, I'm not interested in following that guy. I don't know who he thinks he is. But with the forces he had, he came and fought on behalf of Jabesh Gilead and won the battle. And it was after that battle that men began to realize, whoa, that was God. God raised up Saul. God is working through this man, and he is to be our king. So it was a very monumental thing. It's sort of, again, where it all started. Saul ended up being his final resting place. And again, I just have to see the amazing grace of God in this. Where was Saul's final burial place? At the place where he was obedient to God. At the place where he was walking in the will of God. Experiencing the power of God. Right after that story Samuel called Saul, and he went up, and the Holy Spirit fell on Saul, and he began to prophesy. And there was a proverb in Israel that is Saul also a prophet? Not just to be our king, but he's also a prophet. But God's Holy Spirit fell on him, and it said he became a new man. Now, we've got the whole history on Saul, don't we? A matter of fact, we've been sort of observing since 20 years earlier. That was sort of his high point of obedience. After that was sort of a lot of difficulty, of a prideful heart. A little bit of glory went right to his head. A couple of victories, and he thought he was the top dog and didn't need to have a humble heart towards God. And God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And so the way of the transgressor is hard, and Saul's life was hard and full of anger and hate and demonic attack, and he didn't have the courage to fight the Philistines the way he should. And remember when Goliath came out, Saul allowed little David to go out instead of Saul himself. A rather cowardice move. But yet here at the end, these guys are coming to say, I am choosing to honor Saul in what he did do through God's power. What he did do in obedience to God. And whatever Saul did or didn't or was or wasn't, the bottom line is we still have our eyes. And I'm able to look at my grandkids now with both of my eyes. And we knew it was an incredibly brave thing that he did that day. It's interesting that Jesus says to the church of Ephesus, you've fallen, you've left that first love. The Bible says that the church in the last days, it's like a man who tells his household and all the servants, hey, I'm going away and I'm going to come back. I just don't know when. And eventually the servants began to say, hey, he was supposed to be back. He never came back. I don't think he's ever coming back. And they started drinking and partying and mistreating each other. And after a much longer time than they thought, the master did return. And he took these men and he punished them. And the word there of the servant who was good and became bad, it's like a fruit that went rotten. And that's what we see in Saul. God called him and anointed him and filled him up with the Spirit. But he was a man who knew at times, I need to humble myself, didn't. I need to do everything God says. And God had said, go in and attack the Amalekites. And these are evil people, not one thing, not one goat, not one sheep, not one person, nothing comes out. This needs to be completely annihilated. That's my command. And Saul didn't do it. And when Samuel challenged him on it, he said, oh, well, I thought I'd bring the best back to worship God with and sacrifice to God. And Samuel said, to obey is better than sacrifice. And stubbornness is as idolatry, and rebellion is as witchcraft. And this continual prideful heart, God has now ripped the kingdom away from you and given it to your neighbor who's better than you. And Saul said, well, before you go, Samuel, will you at least go make it look good in front of all the people? Like you're still supporting me and everything's fine. And Samuel's like, sure. There was a moment in time where Saul went from a good banana to a rotten banana. All these scriptures, all these stories, it says in Romans 15, are for us. whom the ends of the ages fall. And there are some of you today walking in partial obedience. You know what partial obedience is, right? Yeah, disobedience, rebellion, pride. Well, God, I'll honor you with this, but I'm not going to honor you this way. I'll honor you with going to church and reading my Bible when I'm stirred, but I'm not going to honor you by giving my tithes and offerings and serving the body. God, I'll pray before my meal, but I'm not going to seek your face and say, God, use me. Here I am, Lord. Whom shall I send? Whom shall go for me? There is a place you got to understand as you are grabbing onto God and growing in the Lord, where God grabs onto you and says, this is my plan and my purpose, and it's full surrender, it's full submission, it's full humility, it's full obedience. And at that point, you begin to bear fruit and thus prove to be his disciples. And it's the most beautiful thing that earth has ever produced. And that is a person with the free will who has the power to say, blankety blank, blank to God, get away from me. I don't want anything to do with you. They have that power. Every one of us do at any point. Or to say, God, your will in my first of every day, in my first of every week, in the first of my finances, and the first with my job, and the first with my family, with the first. I'm going to seek you first in your kingdom, in your righteousness, and all the earth stuff, I'm just committing it to you, Lord. And when a person comes to seek God first above all things, it's just the most supernatural, beautiful thing to look at that rose bush that you almost pulled up because you thought it was dead and you just didn't get around to it. And now the springtime comes and that thing you were going to rip out of the ground all of a sudden started budding. And all of a sudden it has the most amazing flowers, these beautiful red roses that smell so amazing, and you're, wow. God has not a little plan, but a huge plan. And we see here at this moment in time the conclusion that didn't have to be this conclusion, where Saul's continual lack of submission has brought hurt to his kids, hurt to the whole nation, fear, loss, trembling. When that's not the way it started, and it should have gone uphill, not downhill from Nahash. And this is where we need to come back now to this place and say, Lord, search my heart. See if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting. These guys of Jabesh Gilead, David, in 2 Samuel chapter 1, is going to say, I am honoring you guys above all others because of what you did for Saul. Wow. Now, David could have said, remember he's over in Ziklag, he could have said, oh, Saul is dead. Whew. I know I shouldn't be happy, but I am. I know I shouldn't be thinking, finally, ding dong, the witch is dead, the witch is dead. I shouldn't be doing that. But, my heart, that's what my heart, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Well, what did David speak? What was David's heart? I mean, not his words, not his actions, but what was his heart? towards Saul. A man had put him through 15 years of hell, literally. And his whole family, and all the men with him, and the whole nation. Well, we actually get to see this. Turn, if you would, over to 2 Samuel chapter 1, and we see this song of the bow. It's David there sitting in Ziklag, and his heart is lamenting. Look, notice in verse 17, David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan, his son. Notice here, we know David's love for Jonathan is greater than any love towards anyone else on earth. But yet he says, I love Saul as much as I love Jonathan. Do you guys see that? And he told them, I want you to teach everybody in Judah. I want this to be a national song where everybody knows it. And if I come to your town, or if I point at some little boy down the streets of the city and say, sing this song, I want everyone to know this song of the bow. Well, we'll go into it at a later date, but I just want to read it. And some of it you'll catch, some of it, it's poetic. We need to explain it, but just listen to this. This is what he first says about Saul in verse 19. Saul is who? The beauty of Israel. He is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Saul was a mighty man, a mighty soldier, a man who God elected and called and filled with the Spirit and brought victories for Israel. Tell it in Gath. Proclaim it in the streets of Ashkelon. This is where the Philistines are. You go back and you tell them that Saul, that guy you just mocked and desecrated, he's the beauty of Israel. He's a mighty man. He's not what you guys just made him look like. Let the daughters of the Philistines rejoice. Let the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. Let them say, yes, Saul was the beauty in Israel. Oh, mountains of Gilboa, this is where Saul died. Let there be no more dew, nor rain upon you, nor fields of the offerings, for the shield of the mighty is cast away there, the shield of Saul, not anointed with oil. So it was just a place of his death, and it wasn't a place of celebration. Therefore, let that place just be completely barren, which would be very hard to do. Because right down in the valley is the Jezreel Valley, the most fertile land on earth, literally, not figuratively. It is pound for pound, dirt for dirt, the most fruitful agriculture land in the world. But yet, right on the top of the hill of Mount Gilboa, it is cursed to this day. It is dead as a doornail. It's amazing. I think David cursed it, and it's cursed. From the blood, he says in verse 22, of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back. The sword of Saul did not return empty. He was mighty and fought hard. Saul and Jonathan were beloved and pleasant in their lives. You know what? Yes, Saul tried to kill me. Yes, Saul had demons coming on him, and I had to sing songs that keep him from going insane. But let me tell you something. I'm just thinking right now about all the pleasantness. He was my precious father-in-law. His son, Jonathan, we sat and we laughed and we hugged and we told stories and we hunted together and we had some very sweet, sweet times as a family. And in their death, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles and they were stronger than lions. Jonathan, as we go through the story of the life of David, it's a story of authority. It's a story of how you view authority. And there's a great book that I read with the men before we started the life of David called The Tale of Three Kings. It's sort of a play a guy wrote, and it's sort of mystical and takes a little bit of literary license, but the point comes across so powerfully, life-changing. How you view authority, how you respond to authority is everything to whether God's going to be able to use you. And David here is just has nothing but good to say about Saul. He was a mighty man. He was a beloved man. He was a pleasant person. He was a man. And Jonathan, his son, who knew that Saul was no longer going to be king, Saul kept telling Jonathan, you're the next king, you're the next king. Jonathan knew better. He just submitted to his dad. He submitted to the king like David submitted to the king. Jonathan submitted to the king right unto death. Right to the last slash of the sword, right to the last pull of the bow. Jonathan stood side by side with his father, supporting the authority that God had raised up. And even though it was a tragic ending, it says nothing but wonderful things about Jonathan. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, clothed you in the scarlet with luxury, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle. Jonathan was slain in your high places. I have distress for you. May brother Jonathan, you have been very pleasant to me. Your love to me was wonderful, surpassing the love of woman. I have a few wives here, David would say. But my relationship with Jonathan was at a deeper level than anyone. Even you'd think your wife would be the closest person to you. Typically that's the case, but not so with me and Jonathan. There was a deeper relationship still. Oh, the mighty have fallen and the weapons of war perished. I want to end this morning by giving you 5 things David did to completely conquer bitterness in his life. And this is an issue we keep bringing up over and over and over again as we've been teaching through this thing. But I want to put this out to you. Number 1, how did David completely conquer bitterness in his life? Number 1, he chose to think the best about Saul. Interesting, huh? We see now Saul died. And just like a flood, this song came out of David's heart. The Bible makes it clear, guard your heart, for out of it flows all the issues of life. Remember that story where Peter said, Lord, shall we forgive our brothers 70 or 7 times a day? And Jesus said 77 times a day. And just to quickly give you the story, he says there was a guy who owned his master and he gets crazy, $6 million. And he comes to his master, I can't pay it. And he says, well, laws put you in jail till you pay it, which he could never pay. And he goes, please forgive me. And he said, I erase all your debt. You owe me nothing. The man went out rejoicing. And he found a guy who owed him $3. And he starts choking the guy and beating the guy. And the guy's like, please have mercy on me. Give me some more time. And he said, take this guy and put him in prison till he pays me my $3. And people observing both scenarios went back to the first master and said, hey, here's what happened. And he said, come back in here. He said, I forgave you $6 million. You couldn't forgive this guy $3? He said, take this man. Don't just put him in jail, but turn him over to the torturers and keep torturing him until he pays back all that he owes me. And Jesus turns to the crowd and says, and so shall my heavenly Father do to you. This is the key. If you don't forgive your brother from the heart. What do we learn about David here? He did not kill Saul. Both times he was tempted. Both times he had a chance to do it. And his physical sword was put away. And he said, I won't touch the Lord's anointed. But you know how our hearts are, don't you? Jesus said, you've heard, don't kill. But I say to you, if you're hating your brother in your heart, you're killing him. God's looking not on just the outward man. God's looking on the heart. And so we sort of just assumed, yeah, David didn't touch him and walked away, but then in his heart, cutting him up into little pieces and giving him to the vultures to eat and, wake up in the middle of the night, cutting his head off, We wondered what was going on in David's heart. Because we're talking 15 years of Saul putting unbelievable pressure on him until it literally psychologically broke David. And he acted like a madman, slobbering on the gate and eventually fleeing to the land of the Philistines. He was a man who just, under the strain that Saul put on him, he broke. And so you have to wonder if David was like the whole time in his heart going, man, I'm not going to touch him. He's the Lord's anointed, but I can't wait until the day that creep dies. But now we realize, no. Number one, David continued to think only about the good in Saul. And when Saul died, out of the abundance of his heart came out this song about the glorious parts of Saul, the honorable parts of Saul, the good things about Saul. And I don't think David is being ingenuous here. I don't think he was being phony. I think truly that was in his heart. In 1 Corinthians 13, in verse 5 and 6, it says this, that love does not behave rudely, it does not seek its own, it's not provoked. Now listen to this. Love thinks no evil. 1 Corinthians 13:5. Love thinks no evil. Does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. David didn't think evil of Saul. He could have, he should have, he normally, without God, he probably would have. But we see now he wasn't stewing. He wasn't sitting there and he's chasing me down and he threw that spear. I was just eating dinner. That was my favorite type of potatoes. And I took one bite and now I don't get to spend time with Jonathan. And my wife got given to another man. And, he could have just been spinning out in the anger and the hatred, festering, getting deeper and eating him alive. You guys know that, right? That's what bitterness does, right? What's that one saying? It's like you pour a bottle of poison, you pour a cup of poison, and you go up to somebody that made you mad, and you look at them and say, this is for you, and you drink it. That's what bitterness is. You're destroying yourself. Well, it's that person. It's basically everybody. You're a Saul to somebody. Did you know that? And you know how many Sauls you're going to run across in your lifetime? Who knows? This is living on planet Earth with a fallen, sinful man whose heart is desperately, deceitfully wicked. This is living on planet Earth where there's a real devil who's manipulating things to get people to throw spears at you and get people to... you're doing good, and they turn it around, and it's like, man, no good deed goes unpunished. I'll never help anybody again. Satan's trying to get you to be bitter, because it says in Ephesians 4, he gets that foothold in there. Secondly, not only did David choose to think the best about Saul, but he chose to let it go. Guys, faith believes that God has got it. There's something powerful when you can just say, God, I commit it into your hands. Jesus, it tells us in 1 Peter chapter 2, he committed all judgment unto the Father who judges justly. Even on the cross, he's like, there's that guy that I raised his son from the dead, and he's saying, crucify him, crucify him. Dude, I raised your son from the dead, and you want me to... There's the guy that had leprosy, and he just picked up a stone and hit me with it. What did Jesus have to do? He just had to say, I'm not going to sit here and try to figure this out. I'm not going to sit here and try to see how unjust they are and how right I am and how wrong they are and how they should have and could have and didn't and I wouldn't have if I were them, but they, guys, just commit it to God. Just let it go. Lord, by faith. This takes a big step of faith, doesn't it? Let me just ask you, do you believe Romans 8:28? Does God turn all things around for good to those who love God are called according to his purpose? Does he or does he not? Then David came to the place going, God has allowed Saul to be Saul to test my heart. Okay, God, I know you. You're God of grace and mercy. I'm letting it go into your hands. You got a plan. You got a purpose. I trust in your sovereignty. Probably nobody got that better than Joseph. Remember Joseph, the guy with the coat of many colors? And he was wronged by his brother, sold into slavery, and as a slave, he was accused by Potiphar's wife of raping her, which was a lie. And he ends up in prison, not just a criminal, but as a rapist. That's a scary place to be. And he's there for a period of time, and he tells these guys their dreams. And one of them, the cupbearer, is to be restored back to Pharaoh, thinking, and he's like, hey, I'll tell you, man, I'll help you out now that you helped me out. Nothing for 2 years. The guy totally forgot about Joseph. He's rotting in prison, a couple more extra years, and finally Pharaoh has a dream, and he interprets the dream, and he gets out. And remember, the whole world's in a famine. They got to come to Egypt for food. And Joseph's brothers got to come. Well, to make a long story short, he brings his whole family into a section of Egypt called Goshen and takes care of them. And finally, his dad, Jacob, dies. And his brothers come trembling and saying, oh, we know now that Dad's dead, you're going to bring the wrath on us. And Joseph begins to weep. And in Genesis 50, verse 19, Joseph said to them, in Genesis 50, verse 19, do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant it for evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about it as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. And listen, he comforted them and spoke, listen, what? Kindly to them. Guys, I don't know if you get this, but humans are the only people that can comfort and show kindness to this degree. They're thinking, man, Joseph has just been stirring. Oh, the volcano's getting hotter and hotter and hotter, waiting for Dad to die. And once the day he dies, he's going to torture us for 10 years and then kill us and then destroy our families, or whatever they were thinking they would be doing if they were Joseph. And Joseph reveals to them, guys, I haven't been playing a game. I haven't been pretending to be nice. I love you. Yes, I figured it out. You meant it for evil. Man's evil. Maybe the devil helped you be even more evil than you normally would have. I don't know. I can't figure it out. I just know that God had a purpose in all of it, to get me to Egypt, to get me next to Pharaoh, to get me to save the food before the famine came, to save all of us alive. God was in it. And I knew that. Joseph knew that. The day that he was thrown into the pit before he was sold into slavery, he knew that in his heart deeply. Well, what else did David do? He thought the best of Saul. He let it go and believed in the divine sovereignty and purpose of God. He chose to remember. The next thing, David chose to remember God's forgiveness towards him. He's sitting in Ziklag. What happened with David? He was Saul. David was Saul to God. David was evil to God. And what did God do when David there in Ziklag, the whole thing was burnt down and everything was lost? What did God do with David? He just said, go. You're going to get everything back, and end up getting everything back and more. What did God do? He just flooded mercy and kindness and grace on David. You know, we need to remember that. We need to remember how deep of a hole we've been in our lives. And we've been there, huh? I mean, I really, really hope you've seen the lowest valley you're ever going to see. We don't know. But when you're in that valley, I hope you've been a person pouring mercy and grace and kindness and love and forgiveness on people when they're in the valley. And you're not sitting up on the hill going, well, I never would have. I can't believe you. What did you do? You lied, you committed adultery, you stole. Yeah, you made your bed lie in it. You know, I never would be that way. I'm a sinful guy, but I never would have done that. You know, don't. Don't be that person. Don't be the Pharisee. Just remember. I'm looking at this guy. He's in the valley. I've been in the valley. I've seen the worst of my human nature. I've seen the ugliness when Satan gets a foothold in my life and puppets me to say and do things that were evil towards others. I'm not going to sit here and act like I can judge this. I can't. And then the next thing, the last thing here, he chose to keep living in that heart of grace and mercy. David, we're going to discover, didn't just do this towards Saul. David is going to do this towards his leaders that wrong him, towards his best friends that wrong him, towards his own kids that wrong him, towards other family members that wrong him. David is going to have a whole series of Sauls. And you know what we find in David? It's something that was done in his heart, deep, deep, deep in his heart. And I'm sure every one of them had its challenges, but David had this same heart towards every single one of them. You know, people are attacking Christianity today for being intolerant and not nice and all these kind of crazy things. Guys, this teaching of grace that we see in David, we talked about in Joseph, Jesus taught about it in the Sermon on the Mount. And he said, don't just love those who love you, but I say you love your enemy. Bless them, do good to them, pray for them. You be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. No other teachings on planet Earth teach it like this, guys. Muhammad didn't say that. Boy, that guy was evil. Confucius didn't say it. Gandhi, yeah, he showed it, but he said he got it from Jesus. It's interesting that we don't say, well, we follow Christianity and Muhammad's also a good prophet. We don't do that. But the Muslims have to. Why? Because you can't ignore Jesus' teaching in this area. They have to say, we can't just say only Muhammad, only Quran, period. They have to say, and Jesus. Because Jesus and his teachings are so clearly the truth. They have to include it. The Hindus, they can't just say, I'm a Hindu and everything else is wrong. No, I'm a Hindu and I accept everything and Jesus is teachings as well. I'm a Christian. They have to include this. Because, guys, you know, it's like, it's looking at this going, well, you know, the church is full of hypocrites and a lot of hard people there. And, you know, yeah, Satan comes in. The Bible tells us that he can't beat him, join him. Satan's here today. He's trying to fluster you and upset you with his own plants here. But the fact is, guys, is think about it for a minute. Even if you were an atheist, you would be smart to follow these teachings. Right? I mean, just think about it. You're not going to find these teachings on your own. You're not going to think it up. This is something that God revealed. And if you were an atheist, you should say, I am going to follow this moral standard. I would be a richer life. But you know what you'll find? You can't do it. You can know in your head, you should do it. You can purpose in your mind, I'm going to do it. But you won't do it. Because only God and His Spirit can help us conquer our hearts and the bitterness of our hearts. 1 John says, brothers, if your heart condemns you, well, God is greater than our hearts. God alone can help us from condemning ourselves in bitterness. Let's pray.